So we were given 10 minutes, and I always hate those people who get up and read what they're going to say, but I'm going to read what I'm going to say because I can't fit it in any other way in 10 minutes. I want to thank Priya Satya for organizing this event and to the American Historical Association for hosting it. It's really an honor to be on this panel with so many eminent colleagues. As somebody who teaches the war on terrorism in historical perspective, which is my staple, I want to especially express my appreciation to Juan Cole, who I think of as the historian that never sleeps. As day after day, when is this guy ever relaxed? As day after day, he cranks out his informed comments, really an invaluable resource for anyone who is attempting to stay abreast of current developments and to view them with the trained eye of a historian. In thinking about the title of this morning's panel, you always have these huge titles, and what do they really mean? It occurs to me that the most obvious point is that the greatest public use of history is by people in positions of power who invoke the past, whether accurately or not, to justify their policy choices. And of course, those historians who offer a narrative that's most congenial to people in power get the biggest megaphone. But in my presentation this morning, I want to address a narrower aspect of the topic by asking a more concrete question, which is, how publicly useful have historians been in fostering a critical examination and response to the disastrous policy choices that have followed in the wake of the events of 9/11? And related to that question is the question of what roles could we be playing that we're not, and what explains as a profession, our very weak response to the series of crises that we've experienced. Now, embodied in that formulation are two controversial assumptions. The first, and it may set me at odds with at least one colleague on the panel, is the assumption that the policy choices that have been embodied in the war on terror, as pursued by both President Bush and President Obama, that these have been disastrous choices in both human and financial cost to our society and to the people of other societies, and disastrous also from the perspective of creating the international conditions for more violent and more dangerous attacks on our own soil. So that's an assumption that I'm offering here about how I think these policies need to be understood. And a second assumption that's embedded in my formulation is that by and large, members of the historical profession are personally critical of the militaristic direction of US policy. And while we could argue that is a majority of historians who feel that way or not a majority, I think it's fair to say a lot of historians are profoundly at odds with the thrust of the war on terror. And I think you could probably go into many of the coffee urns in history departments everywhere and find people, wringing their hands and saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that." So it's certainly a pervasive attitude. Yet, for all the opposition of historians, this is scarcely registered in the public debate. Juan Cole's valiant efforts notwithstanding, it's barely a peep. And for every Bernard Lewis and Fred Kagan that there is out there, there may be 1,000 dissenters, but you would never know it. What's missing? For one thing, we have failed to shake the triumphalist paradigm of the Cold War. The notion that a sophisticated blend of military power, economic largesse, and diplomatic adroitness, through these approaches, that the United States successfully defeated a totalitarian foe armed with nuclear weapons that was committed to world domination. And of course, the moral of that Cold War story is we can do it again. Just as we won the Cold War through our brilliant tactics, we can win the war on terrorism with roughly the same means. Now, of course, this narrative, there are little tweaks in this narrative. There's a conservative tweak, which really emphasizes military power and little else, and a liberal tweak that highlights economic aid and alliances. But whatever the tweak, the basic storyline is that in the aftermath of the Second World War, and the ensuing 4 decades, the United States pursued a tough policy toward the Soviet Union and the communist world, which was brilliant and effective. Now, many historians think differently about all of this, and there's considerable writing out there, some of it one floor below us, which is really at odds with this narrative. But nevertheless, the triumphalist tale has been invoked by Presidents Bush, Obama, their subordinate officials, and every day by pundits in the media without serious intellectual challenge from people in our profession. If we've been missing from the broad conceptual debate, we've also been absent, largely absent, from the narrower controversies as well, notably the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the US attacks inside Pakistan, the erosion of civil liberties, the expansion of executive power, the intensification of government secrecy, and the egregious violations of international law. So many developments, and the list of our limited participation goes on and on. Let me mention quickly some of the arenas where we could be playing a more significant role. For years now, the conflict over the wars has been transacted in the halls of Congress through a host of resolutions and increasingly tense fights over war funding. In terms of the knowledge, training, skills, and credibility that we have, this is an arena where historians' input could make an enormous difference in our ability to work with congressional staff and to assist grassroots peace groups that are organizing around these matters. And yet only a handful of historians have been visible in this arena. One could say, well, that's not our comfort level, that's not who we are, working with grassroots organizers or congressional staff. In terms of our identity